Welcome to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. Today we're taking a deep dive into a revealing two-part investigation by RealClear Investigations Joel Kotkin. California, once a land of opportunity, now a state in crisis. With rising poverty, soaring housing costs, and economic stagnation, many are questioning whether the Golden State can reclaim its former glory. California boasts the world's fifth largest economy, largely driven by its tech sector and high real estate values. Yet beneath the economic powerhouse lies a state struggling with the nation's highest cost-adjusted poverty rate, the second highest unemployment rate, the highest average housing, the second highest transportation, and the third highest food expenses in the country. And nearly half of America's homeless population resides in California. For many, the so-called California dream is slipping away. Politics play a critical role. California's one-party dominance under progressive Democrats has led to policies that critics say hinder economic growth. High taxes, extensive regulations, and a focus on race, gender, and climate policies have made life harder for many residents and businesses, pushing many to relocate to other states. Climate policies, while well-intentioned, have also added financial burdens. Even California Air Resources Board has admitted that those policies hurt those earning less than $100,000 a year the most. Housing remains one of the biggest challenges. Today, the median California home costs 11 times the average household income, making homeownership a distant dream for many. Public safety and education are also pressing concerns. Despite spending over $128 billion on K-12 education, nearly 75% of students fail to meet federal proficiency standards. Meanwhile, crime and homelessness has led to voter backlash, with progressive leaders being recalled in major cities like San Francisco, Oakland, and Los Angeles. So what's the path forward? Kotkin's report suggests that California's path to recovery lies in reducing taxes, easing housing restrictions, and refocusing on economic growth rather than ideological agendas. And voters seem to agree. Recent elections show Californians are pushing back against policies that threaten their safety and financial stability. The question remains, will the state leaders listen? California has weathered crisis before, from economic downturns to natural disasters, and has always found a way to reinvent itself. But without meaningful reform, the state risks deeper decline. We're joined now by Real Clear Investigations Joel Kotkin, who is a presidential fellow at Chapman and a research fellow at Civitas, to get his expert analysis. Joel, thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Obviously, you wrote this two-part piece. How are we seeing such dysfunctional outcomes coming from such credentialed leaders?
Well, I think part of the problem is that in some senses, if you want to look at it in historical terms, California, basically dominated the last part of the 20th and the early part of the 21st century. I think there was so much money being generated that it became possible for people to think, oh, we can lead the fight on climate change. We can lead the fight on transgender, all these causes, because we had enough money to make up for the fact that maybe some businesses didn't like what they were doing. And unfortunately, what it did is it created not a progressive society, but a regressive one, where class differences are very high, where upward mobility is very difficult.
I mean, you just mentioned it. Your piece shows that progressivism can have a regressive arc. Why is that happening?
Well, I think part of it is, first of all, you have to understand who the progressives are and who the people driving it are. And basically, it really comes from inherited wealth, which is very important. A lot of it comes from the big tech companies. So there are people who really have no particular knowledge or even exposure to what most of America is about. They have their ideas, and very often it's their children or their spouses, and they just throw millions of dollars in this direction. And I think there are people who genuinely believe that the progressive solutions are best for everyone. What they don't like, of course, is any attempt to try to make it harder for them to make enormous amounts of money. When you have, in the state of California, 4 or 5 of the leading companies in the world, in almost all located within 20 miles of each other, you're going to get a confluence of delusion, if you will, that everything's perfect. We're the model. Everybody looks up to us. The fact that home ownership is hard, that people are leaving, that younger people are particularly stressed out, that doesn't really matter because they live in their own bubble, and it's a big bubble. It's a bigger bubble than Washington, D.C.
And California's climate law recognizes that the state cannot affect the climate without the world following suit. How do you rationalize climate and energy policy that is at the detriment of your people in your state that you're supposed to be helping?
Well, first of all, I think the people who make these decisions, frankly, to take a line from from Gone with the Wind, they don't give a damn. I mean, fundamentally, these people, it's not that they don't like them or they want them to suffer, it's that they don't exist. California is a very big state. And if you are, let's say, in the Bay Area and the few parts of, let's say, West Los Angeles, and you live in one universe, you have no idea that if you drive down Highway 33 from LA up towards the Bay Area, off the main freeway, you will see poverty that is very similar to what you see in Mexico or India. But these people don't exist. Plus, when you look at the tech companies in particular, they don't hire a lot of blue collar workers. They don't have to deal with unions. Their contacts are overwhelmingly with other people who have certainly bachelor's degrees, in many cases, masters and PhDs. So they live in a different world than the rest of us live in. And so they fundamentally don't really have to pay attention to it. Plus, in alliance with the oligarchs has been, of course, the tremendous amount of the growth in the sort of college-educated professional class, much of whom work in government, and those people are particularly tend to be very cause-oriented. And in the state of California, they've been the one group that has middle incomes that are going up. Everybody else is pretty much losing.
So, in your first piece, you kind of gave a diagnosis and then a prognosis of California. Then, in your second piece, you gave the prescription of what ails it. Since what ails California can be found in some of our greatest cities in our country, what can they do to solve their wrongs?
Well, the first thing is to say, okay, what is our goal? And, being sort of an old social democrat myself, the goal should be, how do we improve life for more of the people? So how do we make the economy work for them? That's not what we're doing now. For instance, climate policy, the way it's now looked at, is as if California was like a country or even a planet unto itself. And if we reduce our emissions, the world will be much better off. Well, frankly, California doesn't matter. It doesn't emit enough to make a difference. And if it emitted a little bit more, it would probably be better because people wouldn't be buying things made in China with coal, or even to a place like Texas. So I think what the climate policy does is it pushes out what you might call the carbon economy. In other words, logistics, trucking, construction, manufacturing, agriculture, all of those are severely affected. So we got to let those sectors grow again, because there has to be a future for those people who don't have PhDs from MIT or from Caltech. This is something we really need to do. The other thing is the education system, which I deal with quite a bit, which is now becoming ever more indoctrination, and there's that you've got to become stricter on discipline. You've got to allow for charter schools and homeschooling where that works. And you have to be able to get back to the basics. We don't have a workforce that could, for instance, get involved with building spaceships or the new defense industries, or if things like shipbuilding came back. We don't even have the workforce that could do it. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, by far, probably the thing that dominates people's thinking, is housing. We have a housing policy driven by climate policy, which basically means that development is supposed to take place in high density urban centers with mass transit. Now, 3% of Californians get to work on transit. But so what you're doing is you're sort of driving investment into places that are already expensive. And you're creating a product which is essentially high cost, one bedroom and studio apartments, which is not what California families want.
How do we hold the leaders accountable, the people who are making these decisions for everybody?
Well, that's a hard question. I mean, part of the problem is you have a disengaged a populace in many ways. The people who work for the government and the activist class, they're there, they're organized. The rest of people, they're just trying to make ends meet. And of course, much of the population here in California is made up of people who are not U.S. citizens or people who are U.S. citizens but are not used to participating in the electoral system. And of course, we have a media that, for the most part, leans pretty far to the left and pretty much follows the party line. So it becomes very, very difficult to change opinion in a state like California. You need a sort of charismatic figure, and you'll need a lot of money and you'll need a lot of organization. Again, what's happened in California, for instance, is in the last election there were several races where on election day the more conservative candidate was winning, but the week or two, or a month later, what they call ballot harvesting, the essentially the public employee unions just have this ballot harvesting operation, and that made up the difference. So there's a lot of work that has to be done, and it doesn't help that we have a basically non-existent Republican Party because it's a one-party system, and that one party is dominated by the progressives. And the real fight in California in the next few years, I think, will be within the Democratic Party between more traditional liberals and the progressives.
What sort of feedback have you gotten so far on this new reporting that you did?
Well, I got some very nice feedback from my friends up in the Bay Area. I mean, I think there's a recognition, a broad recognition, even among people who are traditionally liberals, that something has to be changed. And to give him credit, I mean, I make fun of Gavin Newsom because he's fun to make fun of, but in a way, Newsom at least understands that there's something happening out there, that people are not happy with this current regime. They do not feel optimistic about the state. And I think to give at least Newsom some credit, he understands that there's anger out there. And if you go in California outside of the Bay Area and parts of LA, you'll find a state where there's a lot of dissatisfaction. And I think that what really needs to happen now is you need to put more pressure on people to say, we don't want these kinds of policies. We want to change things. We want a future for our kids. And right now, the political leadership isn't doing that at all.
Well, Joel, this was a fantastic piece that really outlined all the issues that California is facing and hopefully what the path forward could be. Anything else you'd like to add as we wrap things up?
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to add is that for all its problems, I'm still here. I'm staying in California. There is no state that has what California has in terms of topography, climate, the intellectual and technological skills that are here. So I think California can come back. I just think we need to change direction and begin to realize that California is really about a, if you will, an extended version of the American dream, and we have to pursue policies that make that possible.
Joel, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller.